Our theme this year, really, I wanted to focus in on Acts 18, right? Here it says, a Jew named Apollos powerfully refuted the Jews, showing by the scriptures that the Christ was Jesus. And if you haven't read, about Apollos himself, go back and read, the whole of chapter 18. But I thought with our focus on atheism and Marxism and Mormons and all these things, we've got a little bit more of a focus on apologetics and really from the scriptures reaching those with the gospel message. Okay? The first thing I'm going to do is give you guys a little bit of the history here in Pella. To equip you, because when we go out, it's a great way to get people in a non-spiritual, a natural realm. Maybe we get onto the topic of, hey, do you know anything about the history here in Pella? Or use the tracts, and I'll show you the tracts later. But I'm going to give you a brief understanding of that so that you are equipped to have some of those conversations and answer those questions. The core is the founder, right? The founder of Pella is Henry Peter Scholte. He was born in Holland in early 1800s. He was credited as being one of the founders of the Secession of 1834, right? And we'll touch on that a little bit more, but the Secession of 1834 was a few of the pastors and so on seceded from the church. The church had come under state or government rule and was taking the church in very different directions that were not aligned doctrinally and so on. So that's why they were rejecting what the state church was teaching, and that's why they eventually seceded from that state church. Right? Again, they sought reform first, but they eventually did secede. Now, Scholte, the founder of Pella, did convince Henry de Kock, who's the other key founder of the Secession, after he was deposed, that was the right path forward. They faced constant pressure. Eventually, Scholte formed an immigration society. So 1834 to 1847, so there's 15 years he fought and struggled through that. Right? There was persecution from the state church, in terms of fines and jailing and all sorts of different things that they did to persecute those who were not part of the state church. They arrived in America in 1847 and founded Pella. One of the things you'll hear a lot is that that whole secession was about the hymnals and the right to worship and sing what they wanted, right? So I'm going to give you a little bit more here, right? Because the background is that the king commissioned a new hymnal in 1807. It's like 2 years after Scholte was born. But then as things grew, right, it grew to a certain point, but that the hymns did not reflect the biblical doctrine that the church was teaching, and not only did many of the pastors reject that and recognize that, many of the congregations rejected those things as well. And specifically, one of the core pieces was what we understand today, as the doctrines of grace. In Holland, that was very significant because that came out of a synod or a classis of Dort, which is short for the city that it was formed in. Dort is short for Dordrecht, which is a city in southern Holland. So 200 years earlier, they had formulated this response and many of these doctrines. That's where that comes out of. But because of the secession and all these different things, the state seemed to focus on the hymnals because that was something concrete that they thought they could get the public and everyone else behind. But there were many other issues around baptism and membership and you name it across the board that were impacted. So it wasn't just a response rejecting the hymnals, but that was kind of the key tip of the spear as we speak. Let me take you to that point when the secession right, and the forms of secession were signed. It came, right, because the state had come to Henry de Kock, because he was very outspoken about these things. They had reprimanded him and his church and said, no, you must sing from these hymnals and so on, and they agreed initially, but eventually that kept on growing inside him. And one Sunday he came and he preached, and he said, we're not going to sing from these hymnals. The state was there, and they shut things down right away. They chained the doors, they barred the doors, everything, and then deposed him, so he was no longer officially a pastor. The elders obviously rejected that. Scholte, who had written back and forth with de Kock, heard about that and immediately came to him that week. He arrived on Friday with the intent to preach in the church on Sunday to the congregation, since their pastor was deposed. But the doors were still barred, and the congregation had made plans to have their worship service in a barn instead. The state got wind of that and came and shut down the barn and everything else, so he ended up preaching in the open air in a field behind the church. So that's why we have Anthony teaching on open air preaching, right? But so that's that's the event that most people point to in terms of the beginning of the secession of 1834. The church council and the elders documented the acts of secession, delivered them to the state, and so on. But that's kind of the key defining event. Let's move on a little bit, because then years after that, Scholte came and he gathered over 800 non-Catholic Christians in an immigration society to come over to America and come to a place of refuge where they wouldn't be under the persecution of the state church and so on there. They came through New York. They eventually traveled to St. Louis. There he met a Baptist missionary who was actually a missionary to Iowa. How many people have met a missionary to Iowa before? Well, I think every one of you here today are missionaries to Iowa. So, that missionary was in St. Louis. They ended up talking and said, well, I think I've got the perfect place. He led them to this place in Pella. They bought 18,000 acres for $1.75 an acre. Pretty good price. But they chose this place in part because it was somewhat unsettled, but it was also on a hill, right? So they pointed back to Matthew saying, a light on a hill cannot be hidden. So actually, the square, if you look at the town square, right, you've got the buildings around, and then in the middle, it's fairly flat, but there's a part that goes up a little higher. That's actually the highest point in the county, right there. And that's why Pella is here. Again, right, Pella, a city of refuge, a place of rest from that persecution. Also, and we'll see in a tract here, Pella has a significant biblical name too. Actually, not biblical, but there's references there. They just don't list Pella there. But Pella was one of the 10 cities of the Roman Decapolis, and traditionally, right, when Jesus warned his disciples and the Christians to flee when the Romans came, they fled to Pella, which is across the Jordan River and so on. So that's why Pella ended up being named Pella. And you'll see here as well, this is a famous aerial depiction over Pella from, I think, 1870 something, right? But it shows the streets of Pella, and if you look, you'll see that many of the street names are named after Christian principles. It showed the foundation and importance of their Christian faith as they came and settled here. Now, many of them, the ones going, I believe, east and west, are still there. So we've got Union and Independence on the other side of the church here. There's Peace and a number of others. Those are still in place here in Pella. But the ones going north and south, they had Christian principle names as well, but those have been changed to First, Second, Third Broadway, stuff like that. But you see from the founding of this that this was very important. In the first year of them settling here, they started a church and they started a Christian school, right? They had already made provisions and plans for these things when they were still in Holland. So they said, these are the important things for us when we come and settle in America. So you see that importance there, right? Central College also is very significant, right? I mean, less than 10 years after they settled here, they started this college. So it was actually the Baptist, who came in and started Central College in 1853. And then they ran into a few financial struggles and said, we can't support 2 Baptist colleges in Iowa. So they ended up selling this to the Reformed Church of America. And that's where that's the affiliation that they have today. So that's a brief history of the Christian foundations here in Pella. Anybody have any questions on that?